Welcome to the 16th century Mughal Empire. At its peak, this was one of the richest empires on Earth, built on massive trade networks and housed in vast palaces carved from pure white marble. But all that imperial power couldn't stop a thief. Emperor Akbar, the most powerful man in the region, was furious. Someone had stolen his most prized personal possession directly from his private quarters. The stolen item was a white jade thumb ring, carved with a delicate floral pattern of gold filigree, rubies, and emeralds, a unique piece of immense material and royal value. The problem was the complete lack of physical evidence. Only 5 royal servants had access to the room. There were no witnesses, and centuries before fingerprints or security cameras, the trail was entirely cold. Absolute royal authority can command armies, but it cannot force an unknown thief to speak. If those 5 suspects kept their mouths shut, the crime would remain unsolved. That's when the emperor's chief minister, Birbal, stepped forward. Instead of using threats or torture, he observed the 5 nervous suspects with a calm, calculating demeanor. He did something strange. He reached into a bundle and handed each of the 5 men a completely ordinary, identical wooden stick. Birbal then announced a rule that sounded like a children's story. He declared that one of these sticks belonged to the true thief, and because it was enchanted, the guilty man's stick would magically grow exactly 2 inches overnight. Why would a notoriously brilliant minister try to solve a high-stakes crime using an obvious fairy tale? Birbal had turned these ordinary pieces of wood into psychological yardsticks designed to measure a specific human reaction, the fear of being exposed. As the court dismissed for the day, the innocent servants looked down at their sticks with confusion, their hands steady. But the guilty man avoided eye contact, sweat forming on his brow as he gripped his piece of wood. By nightfall, the suspects were sent back to their dark, isolated quarters. Alone with his thoughts, the thief was left entirely unprotected from his own imagination. Exhausted and paranoid, the guilty servant couldn't sleep. He paced the small room erratically, constantly checking the stick in the dim light, wondering if it was already beginning to stretch. He was experiencing a severe spike in cognitive load. This is the heavy mental tax required to maintain a lie, while simultaneously trying to predict and defend against an unknown threat. Birbal had taken the heavy burden of solving the crime off his own shoulders and placed it squarely onto the mind of the criminal. Consider the 2 paths Birbal had forced upon the thief. On the first path, if the magic is real and he does nothing, his stick will grow. Come morning, he will be easily identified and caught. On the second path, if the stick is normal, doing nothing leaves him safe, but because he cannot be certain, the risk of the unknown is paralyzing. Desperate to regain control over his fate, the servant abandons logic. He pulls out a small knife and slices exactly 2 inches off the top of his stick. Under the extreme pressure of uncertainty, a guilty mind will actively self-sabotage just to create an outcome it can predict. The next morning, the paranoid shadows of the night gave way to the bright morning light of the court, and the 5 suspects were brought back before the throne. Birbal confidently lined up the servants. He walked down the row, swiftly inspecting each wooden stick held out by the men. 4 of the sticks remained exactly the same length, but the 5th stick was clearly, undeniably, 2 inches shorter than the rest. Realizing he had entirely trapped himself, the guilty servant physically collapsed to his knees. Trembling, he reached into his clothes and handed back the stolen jade ring. The initial lack of physical evidence didn't matter. The criminal had been manipulated into manufacturing his own definitive proof. Emperor Akbar watched in shock, and then deep admiration. Brute imperial force had failed, but quiet intellect had recovered his most prized possession. Birbal didn't waste time hunting for the thief. He simply took the suspect's own internal guilt and weaponized it against him. The outcome highlights the hidden cost of deception. A lie requires constant draining maintenance, whereas innocence requires no action at all. Akbar's court learned that understanding the human mind can be a more effective weapon than imperial force, because true wisdom is simply knowing how to let the guilty catch themselves.